Hi, Stephen here from Fated Crossings. Today I would like to talk about the moon in Aries and what it means to have that moon. And my goal is to differentiate the traditional perspective from the modern psychological perspective and to see how these two viewpoints diverge. So first, let's pretend that we can climb into a time capsule and go back to Iran or Afghanistan or Syria in the 10th century, or Iraq, places like that in the 10th century, 9th century, etc. And let's pretend that we can show an astrologer from this time and place the chart of someone who has the moon in Aries. So the first thing such an astrologer would note is that the moon is in the sign of Mars, the domicile of Mars. Later, I might get into other rulers of Aries, such as the triplicity rulers, the exaltation ruler, which would be the sun. But for now, we'll stick to what it means to have the moon in the sign of Mars. So our hypothetical Iranian or Afghanistani or Iraqi astrologer from the 10th century would say, well, this person is going to be kind of fickle in their work, and their mother is going to find bad luck, terrible things. This person will be obstinate in their anger, stubbornly angry, getting involved in scandals and conflicts, and they will be mingled or mixed up with soldiers, fighters, criminals of all kinds. They will be walking around at night with people who have a bad intention. And interestingly enough, in my own practice, I do have people with moon in Aries for whom this description can kind of stick. For example, I have a client who is a merchant. She has a store in a depressed neighborhood in a big city. And even though she herself isn't a criminal, she is, walking around at night with those who have a bad intention. They come into her store to buy cigarettes and beer. They rob her, all sorts of stuff. She's always having issues because of this bad neighborhood. I have another client who is a physician who is patching up these robbers and criminals who get into fights, knife fights and gun fights and things like that. So even though the antique perspective of moon in Aries seems rather gruesome and macabre, if you tweak it a little bit and calibrate it for the modern era, then sometimes it can actually stick. But then after talking about what it means to have the moon in the sign of Mars, Aries, which, by the way, they would say the same thing for the moon in Scorpio, because for them, for the traditional astrologer, the traditional medieval astrologer, moon in Scorpio is also ruled by Mars. Mars rules Scorpio. So the same thing, fickle in their work. A mother who is unlucky or getting involved in difficult things. The person would be very obstinately angry, mingled up with bad people, and on and on. It would be the same delineation. But getting back to Aries, then the astrologer would drill down and look at what specific portion of Aries the moon happens to be in. So I use, following these traditional astrologers, I use the Egyptian terms. So from 0 degrees of Aries up to 5 degrees and 59 minutes, this is the term of Jupiter. And so they would make predictions based upon that. They would say, well, this individual is going to make money from merchant dealings and from foreigners, from dealings with foreign countries, going to foreign lands. That's how they'll make their money. And this individual is going to sue somebody one day. But the person will be blessed with children who will honor him or her. And as the person ages and grows old, so will their money grow. And they will live a long time and have a good life. And they would then look, let's say the moon is between 6 degrees of Aries to 11 degrees and 59 minutes. This is the term of Venus. And so the predictions would change a little bit. They would say the person will be a good individual. They'll be moral. They will be esteemed by others. But because it's the term of Venus, the individual is going to find their spouse because of fornication, because of some sexual controversy that happens in his or her own house. And a separation is going to come about because of this, but it will pass. And the person is going to have children from multiple partners, and their spouse is going to be very much different from him or her. Also, they would say that the individual is going to get a lot of money without having to worry about suing people because it's Venus, right? They're going to have a lot of money, and they're going to be held in high regard by very important people, politicians, leaders in business, or what have you, the upper crust. But if the moon happens to be from 12 degrees of Aries to 19 degrees and 59 minutes, this is the term of Mercury. So Mercury becomes Mercury becomes a ruler of the moon, and they would predict that this individual is going to be a good writer with a lot of useful ideas that turn out to be very successful. The person will be a member of the upper classes, or at least they'll be involved with the power brokers of the world, and they will actually be kind of above them a little bit. However, the prediction would be that the individual superiors would also, even though they're kind of upper crust types of people, they would be very coarse, vulgar, crude. Nevertheless, the individual with the moon in this particular part of Aries would give very sound and good advice and would have common sense, and their works would be good. But if the moon is within 20 degrees up to 24 degrees and 59 minutes of Aries, then that's the term of Mars. And so there's a double influence of Mars here because Mars rules the sign and the term. So they'd say this person is going to be burning up with anger. But moreover, they will probably work with hot things and metal things. And the person's going to find hurt because of four-footed animals, wild animals, unless a benevolent planet aspects the moon. This would free the individual from any harm from wild animals. But if the moon is in the final degrees of Saturn, then the final degrees of Aries, which are ruled by Saturn, the term of Saturn from 25 degrees of Aries up to 29 degrees and 59 minutes, then the person won't have a spouse, will be sued by women, and whatever comes into his or her hands, the person will destroy it. Up until the Saturn return. They used the Saturn return as an important threshold when the moon was in the term of Saturn in Aries. So after the Saturn return, then all of this terrible luck would just magically flip itself, and then the person would get married, the person would begin earning a lot of money, and the person would have a very happy family life. All of this if the moon was in the term of Saturn in Aries. So this is the traditional perspective. And as you can see, it is rather different from what we are accustomed to hearing. We're used to hearing the psychological viewpoint. And that's very useful. You know, when we see someone with Aries, we're used to thinking, okay, this person is impatient. This person has a very short reaction time. They're going to make decisions and take action very quickly. They're going to follow their instincts without worrying about it, and on and on and on. And, you know, I think this is probably the more useful approach to take when counseling somebody astrologically. All of the traditional stuff is more focused on objective reality, but there's one thing they have in common. The traditional astrologer from the medieval period and the modern psychological astrologer would both agree that the individual with moon in Aries would have some internal anger. There would be a lot of passion on the inside. But as you can see, the traditional astrologer is more focused on practical, objective prediction, whereas the modern psychological astrologer would probably focus, I think, if she or he is a good one, would probably focus on the moon in Aries' ability to develop the personal identity. Because Aries is fire, and when we think of the personal identity, we think of the fire element. Aries, in fact, is cardinal fire. So right off the bat, we know that whatever a moon in Aries means, it's referring to a lot of changeable things that happen automatically. It's a very changeable moon. And this changeability can be offset by, for example, a fixed sign rising, a sun in a fixed sign. So it can be offset by other chart factors. But generally speaking, the moon in Aries is always changing. Something is always happening to it, and it's always taking on projects or pursuing things that help to develop the personal identity. And, this can actually translate into some relationship problems, quite frankly. The individual hates to be supervised by other people, hates to be disciplined or restricted by other people, and sometimes there can be a hard time allowing true intimacy to develop, true devotion to develop, because when you're intimate with someone, then the other person has a little bit of power over you, and this is anathema to Moon in Aries, who wants to place itself second to no one. Now, Aries is a dry sign, and all the dry signs are capable of intense focus. So people with this placement can block everything out and just focus on their immediate objective, which they usually have. Moon in Aries is often hungry for something. It desires or craves something, and in its pursuit of the desired thing, it can just block everything out and focus on getting what it wants. Very physically assertive, usually, and defiant towards authority. It must be free. This is the modern psychological perspective, and I agree with it 100%. Most people with Moon in Aries desire autonomy. They express their feelings directly and forcefully, and it's natural for them to take the initiative in any kind of a situation, but especially emotional situations. And usually they kind of dominate or control the domestic environment. So that kind of suggests that the Moon in Aries person would probably be better off with a partner who is okay with taking second place. I know successful marriages of Moon in Aries people to spouses who have, for instance, Taurus rising or something of that nature. Some sort of watery or earthy rising sign might be a good match for an individual with Moon in Aries. But the bottom line is that the advice is that the individual has to bring out their Libran qualities, most of all. It's very important. That is the advice. They have to bring out the Libran qualities, because their quarrelsomeness can be a problem area. They're highly sensitive to any perceived insult. Now, if you were to speak to a Moon in Aries person, and I have a lot of them as my clients, many of them would say, Jesus, no, dear God, I'm not the problem one here. I'm not the quarrelsome one here. It's my partner. It's the other person. And I think that these individuals might actually be employing the mechanic of projection. That's what I think. That they're projecting the problem onto the other person, because there is a constant inner irritability and frustration inside of the person. And so this can make them a little inconsiderate sometimes, can make it difficult to tune in to others, to listen, to just be there for them, because they're highly impatient, very sensitive to criticism. And because this is the fire sign we're talking about here, there's a little bit of arrogance mixed in as well. You're not going to really find them criticizing themselves so much. And if you try to be gentle with this person, a lot of times they're going to interpret it as weakness. That's very important for you to remember if you have to deal with the Moon in Aries. Now, again, and I can't emphasize this enough, you really have to take into account other chart factors. For example, I have clients who have, for example, a Scorpio rising with the Moon in Aries, which would place such a moon in the 6th house. And some of what I'm saying here won't particularly fit with them. They are not necessarily dying to get into a fight with you. They do not necessarily adore thrills and suspense. They do not necessarily seek out conflicts and things like that because of the wateriness of their rising sign. So you have to take some of this stuff with a grain of thought. Now, one thing I have noticed about Moon in Aries people, for the men, it can take them a little bit of time to adjust to the strictures of relationship, to the higher responsibilities of marriage. They can find marriage to be rather constraining. And for the women, let's just say it's not the most domestic placement of all. I know Aries moons, and a lot of them, Aries moon women, either A, they can't have can't have children, and not necessarily because of infertility, it's just life circumstances. They want children, but they can't have them because of their job or what have you. And then I know a lot of moon and Aries women who just don't want children at all. They might have one or two, and if so, they are very good mothers, very protective, fiercely protective. But having kids isn't like the main thing in life. You know, having biologically significant copulation isn't like, you know, the order of the day. That's not what they're all about. But nevertheless, when such a mother does have a child, she turns out to be a good mother, even though by and large she would otherwise resist any kind of emotional ties. And she would want the child to be self-reliant and independent just like she is. A lot of moon and Aries people, they do have conflicts with their mothers. Not all the time, absolutely not all the time, but it happens more often than you might expect, where maybe the mother and the daughter are competing with each other. Maybe the mother sees the daughter as some kind of sexual competitor. You know, that might sound creepy and freaky and weird, but, you know, psychology itself is creepy and freaky and weird, and all sorts of, you know, Freudian hobgoblins are roiling about on the inside, and, you know, it is what it is. So, yeah, moon and Aries is absolutely not going to put up with anything. They're a little bit nomadic, and they need to learn patience and consideration for others. Very proud, unyielding, unbending. Now, interestingly enough, I have a lot of clients with moon and Aries who, believe it or not, are teachers or are somehow engaged in education. And I think that's because the moon, the instincts of the moon, combine with Aries in such a way as to produce or offer up explanations. Moon in Aries likes to give explanations for things, and this actually makes them good teachers. Because the moon is so instinctual, when she's in Aries, there's an instinct for offering up a plan, categorizing things, developing systems, providing shapes and forms to ideas, and manifesting things above all, exercising the authority of Aries to create order out of chaos. And so this actually makes them very good teachers. Setting the direction for pupils, helping them to develop their own personalities, just like the moon in Aries himself or herself develops their own personalities. So that's also something that I've noticed. They look beyond the obvious because this is the nature of the moon, to approach areas that might be closed off. You know, the moon stands at the threshold between our inner experience and the outer experience. And so when she's in Aries, then this is a very powerful factor for guiding the growth of other people. So that's what I have to say about the moon in Aries. I hope that you learned something from this tutorial. And if you'd like to contact me, the address is steven@fadedcrossings.com. I hope you have a great one, and I will see you next week.